So let me tell you guys a quick story. The story of the history of the Fantastic Four movie rights. Now, as you may have heard, in the early and mid 90s, Marvel suffered through massive financial issues to the point where they neared bankruptcy. So, to keep the company afloat, they wound up selling off the movie rights to many of their characters that were popular at the time to various studios. They wound up keeping the ones that were not so popular because they just couldn't sell them, and which is funny because those wound up being the Avengers. The Avengers weren't really a big thing in the 90s. And now, of course, they're the hugest thing because those are the most competently made movies, because that's Marvel making them. But this is the reason why there were a whole bunch of different studios making, Spider-Man and X-Men and Fantastic Four and Ghost Rider and Daredevil. It's all coming from different places, and that's actually why. But they had actually sold off the Fantastic Four at some earlier point. I'll get back to that in just a moment. These days they've gotten back just about everything in terms of all their characters, but the Fantastic Four is actually a really interesting case. They've been called the first family of Marvel Comics because they kicked off Marvel's sales resurgence in the Silver Age. Now, DC had managed to reimagine superhero comics, but Marvel was rather hesitant to go back to superheroes because they fell off so hard at the end of the Golden Age, and what was popular throughout the 50s was sci-fi and monster comics. So they created Fantastic Four, which was a superhero comic, but it was very rooted in science fiction, and the first couple of issues had covers that made it look like monster comics more than a superhero thing, and, because the monster comics were popular. So once the series had caught on, they pretty much dropped the charade, and it was a standard superhero comic, and the first real big hit for Marvel in the 60s, and then, of course, they wound up doing Spider-Man and Daredevil and Hulk and Iron Man and X-Men and everything else. But anyway, Fantastic Four is one of the earliest movie rights that got sold off, even before Marvel's financial woes. But the thing about buying movie rights is if you don't use it, if you don't actually make a movie, eventually they revert back to the person that sold them to you. So in the 90s, Marvel suddenly started talking about a Fantastic Four movie and advertising for it, and then it just never came out. What had really happened was the studio made an ash can, a cheaply made movie that can be just made very quickly so they could keep the rights. It doesn't matter if the movie you make is even released, only that it's created. So they hired legendary cheapskate Roger Corman to make it as cheaply as possible. The cruel joke is that Roger Corman, the cast, and even Marvel Comics themselves were all completely unaware that the movie was never intended for release, so it was advertised for a while. They did nothing with the rights until once again, in the mid-2000s, they had to make a movie again or lose the rights, and not wanting to lose the rights to the franchise that they were doing shit all with, they made another movie, the shitty 2005 Fantastic Four movie, and that one not only got actually released, but it even got a slightly less shitty sequel, The Rise of the Silver Surfer movie, which was the only Fantastic Four movie ever made that wasn't made specifically to hold on to the movie rights. Of course, while these movies made a bit of money, especially the first one, they still sucked, and the franchise lay dormant again until once again they were in danger of losing the rights. Third time the charm? The movie was handed off to Josh Trank, who had previously made Chronicle, which was a very interesting deconstruction of a superhero movie, and this time they casted the film well. They got heavyweights such as Michael B. Jordan and Kate Mara. The special effects budget wasn't a MacBook Pro in an old version of Poser, and superhero movies were at the time becoming more taken seriously, and they were making some serious money. So what the actual fuck happened? How is this movie so reviled? How is it such a failure? Is it really even that bad? So finally sitting down and watching this, I kind of get it. I get what Trank was going for. I see where it went awry. I get why he disavowed the final film, claiming to have been left out of the editing phase and how the final product wasn't the movie that he wanted to make. I get the whole thing about an entire huge chunk of the movie just being missing and it being super obvious that there was a huge chunk of the movie missing. I see the skeleton of the good movie that's in there. And I still say that everybody's wrong about this film, but at least they're wrong for all the right reasons. Trank really did try here. You got a great cast. The direction is very good. They modernized the entire idea of the Fantastic Four in a way that isn't cringy, and it actually kind of works, but then it doesn't. And I'll explain why in a little bit. So we start off with Reed and Ben as kids, and we see them grow up. Reed is having this interest in creating a device to teleport matter, and the only one taking him seriously is his high school buddy Ben, who doesn't understand the science but is hugely interested in what his super brainy BFF can do. Eventually, Reed is recruited to the Baxter Corporation by Franklin Richards, and he works closely with Franklin's adopted daughter Susan and a somewhat disgruntled ex-employee who is hired back, Victor Von Doom. Later on, when Franklin's son Johnny gets into some trouble, he puts him to work, and the four bond closely, though I find this odd as it's the wrong four. Ben only winds up coming along on their expedition when the time comes because Reed refuses to go without him. So they go to a place that is definitely the negative zone from the comics, even though they call it something else. They get their powers. Sue gets powers too, despite the fact that she didn't actually go on the trip, since she's exposed to the unique energy when they return and everything explodes. Victor seemingly died on the trip. They get their powers. Ben becomes kind of a muscle for hire for the military while Reed runs away. Johnny starts training to also work for the military. They have to track down Reed and rebuild the machine that got them into this mess because they feel getting back to the not negative zone is the key to reversing their powers. So far, so good, but then that's where it all goes wrong when they actually make this happen. And of course, oh, surprise, Victor's still alive, and he has super vague powers, and suddenly there's the last boss battle. Seriously, they go back to the place, they bring Victor back, he starts making things blow up, and suddenly we're at the end of the film. We're left with a villain that has no motivation, no character arc, nothing. We get that he was already a bit of a dick, but after time he did get along well enough with everybody, or at least he worked well with them, and now he's like, I must destroy the Earth, and we have no idea why. All that information is missing. Why these movies insist on giving Doctor Doom superpowers at all is beyond me, and I actually had no idea what his powers are in this movie. He just sort of waves his arms and stuff blows up, or rocks shift around and stuff like that. Obviously, they must all come together to beat him, but it all happens so fast that I was left thinking, that's it? And that's odd, because I spent the first half of the movie wondering why people thought it was so awful, and it starts out so great. It has good acting, it's directed well, and then this happened. My main issue, though, is that I think that, and I really do think that even if Trank had been allowed to make the movie that he wanted to make his way, I'm not sure that it would have worked anyway, because this movie is super dark. I don't mean just the color palette. I mean every aspect of it is just dark and violent. Reed is from a broken home, Ben is abused, Johnny is the unfavorite, Sue seems like she vaguely might fit somewhere on the autism spectrum, and Doom has some sort of grudge that's never really explained. The characters mope about their powers. Even Johnny, he's the only one to embrace his power, but he doesn't show any of the enthusiasm or love for being the Human Torch that he should, and he's the best part of the movie. Now, even if this movie was good, it would still be wrong for the Fantastic Four. The Fantastic Four have no more business being gritty and super violent than they did back in 2005 being forcibly hip. It seems really the only film that actually understands what the Fantastic Four should be was The Incredibles. So I have to defend this slightly. It's definitely the best of the 3 theatrically released Fantastic Four movies. It's at least half of a competently made movie, but that doesn't make it good. It's just sort of the best of the worst. I'd say that it's depressingly average. It's a movie that aspires to be a wrong-headed but well-made movie, but it was tripped up by bad editing. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10.